Hello and welcome to a much promised continuation of how to build a world in our series How to Be a Great Game Master. And guess what? It's finally time for you to draw the map of your world. So far all we've been talking about is story driving the world creation, world building phases. We spoke about how do you evoke story with your world and how do you drive the story of your players with the construction of your world. Now, however, we're going to talk about how your story controls your world building process. And you're going to see here the real benefit of having done the evocation and the driving of your world, and you're going to see how control really makes map drawing easy. So this is a world that I've created myself. You can see it behind me. I had it printed out for my players because, well, we like big scale. What we're going to cover today, how to draw a map, very basically using story. We're going to look at how to populate that map, and we'll look at how that all comes together to give you a real world that your players are going to think you've spent decades designing, when in actual fact you've spent maybe a couple hours. So let's kick off. How do you start drawing a map? What do you use to do it? The map that I created, I literally sat down, I had a blank canvas in front of me, I use a program called Photoshop, and I said, let's create this new world for my players to experience. And I literally just drew some random ovals around the board. I decided that I was going to have lots of smaller continents so that there was some sea travel. Why did I want sea travel? There's a story in that, isn't there? If you've got one gigantic continent, your story is mainly going to be about walking, preambulating, strolling, riding, running, skipping, hopping, but there's not going to be a hell of a lot of sailing, swimming, drowning, underwater stuff. If you've got lots of lakes, maybe. But for me, the story said we need to have some areas of water. We need to have a motivation for the characters to go to sea. So I created a whole bunch of little ovals, and then I started to draw jagged outlines. And if you like, let me know. I'll do a tutorial on how to draw a map like the one behind me. It's really easy. So you sketch out your shape of your world, and you start to put down mountain ranges, and you put down deserts and forests and things. And I hope that by now you have decided that climate is going to be one of your main drivers. You've worked out that the setting for your world is going to be, say, a happy one or a miserable one, and your geography reflects it. If it's going to be a tough world where things are hard, reduce the amount of beautiful rolling plains. Add in dense jungle, swamps, magnificent mountain ranges that are really difficult to pass through. Add in geography that's going to sit well with what you are trying to evoke and what is going to allow you to drive your story. So you populate your continents with all sorts of weird and wonderful things, and you want to bring in a little bit of realistic geography. In my world, what I did was I said, right, in the very center of the map, there is this desert belt. I kind of went the opposite to what planet Earth has. We have jungles on our equator. I said we're going to have deserts on our equator. So I populated deserts across. Some deserts I made bigger than others. There's a continent that's basically an entire desert because I wanted it to feel very different from the continent that's mainly forest, for example. I wanted to be able to evoke different senses within my players as they traveled across this very different world. So you create your map. You populate it with the geography that you think best is going to help you evoke the setting that you're trying to create and that will drive it. Now comes what I find to be the most entertaining part. You now start to populate it and you go, right, I want to have dwarves, I want to have elves, I want to have humans, I want to have lizard folk, I want to have orcs, I want to have goblins, I want to have this, I want to have that, I want to have the next thing. That's fine. Tell me the story. Who was the first race that took over the planet? Who was your origin race? Was it the elves, as everybody likes to think? Was it the dwarves, as the dwarves like to think? Was it perhaps the orcs who changed over time into the elves? Are you creating a galaxy because you're in a science fiction setting? Who were the first race? Who was the master builder race? What did they do in terms of their planets? And of course, when you're designing space, you want to create a universe that is exactly the same as a planet. In terms of a fantasy planet, you want to create space where you've got difficult nebulas to cross, where you've got vast tracts of no planets, which means no help, etc. The application is the same. So start to tell a story about your world. Look at your map and say, well, this is my Euphrates. This is where it all started. And it started with the elves. And they propagated north and they propagated south. They couldn't cross this giant ocean because they weren't sea dwellers. So the merfolk did it. And the merfolk over time evolved and grew legs and started to wander around on this little island, which was protected from the elves over there. In other words, you are using the story of your world to create your world. And there's no right or wrong answer. If you decided that everybody spawned at the same time, or perhaps because it's a fantasy setting, the gods said, elves there, dwarves there, orcs down there, thou shalt not travel into the ice giant's territory in the north. That's fine too, because there are a series of questions that you're going to need to be able to ask yourself and answer before your players arrive. The very first question is, who settled there and why? And if nobody settled there, that's an even bigger question to ask why. Now we can go into the nitty-gritty, and there are many other GM channels out there that do detail specifically how to determine the age of your world. So that you go, well, my planet is only 3 billion years old, so the mountains are gigantic and the rivers are fairly shallow and small and there's lots of plains everywhere, and however you like to do it. Are your civilizations ancient? Have the elves been around since the beginning of memory? Are they 10,000 years old? Are they 100,000 years old? Are there races that are even older, that have mysteriously vanished? Those are story questions. And they're story questions that should be driven by what are you trying to evoke and what are you trying to use to help drive your story. Is your planet going to be populated with gates that allow travel from one point to another, but no one knows who built them? You can't just say, oh, no one knows who built them. Somebody does know who built them. You. You have to know who built them, because it gives you an arsenal of stories to put away and say, well, those portals that allow people to travel all over the place were built by a race who eventually created a portal that allowed them to go to another dimension or another plane. And they want to come back, except they're trapped. So they're going to leave little clues on how to open up a portal to a new dimension, to a new plane. And then they're going to come through and take over the world. Wow, that's a whole new story, a whole new campaign that's come out of just asking a few little questions about who did it, who settled here, who built these things. So you ask who settled in this particular region of the map. If you look at the map that I have, I said, right, this is where the human kingdom is. Why is the human kingdom here? Now let's ask some questions. Well, let's ask some more questions, as a matter of fact. Who did they fight to take over the land? Were they like Native American Indians, in which case they were the first ones there? So they started to populate, they started to build cities. How are they still there? Have they managed to survive for thousands of years? Are they new, in which case there are not a lot of roads, there might be some tracks. The cities are not very big because they haven't had time to grow. City infrastructure is also not very well developed. They haven't needed to. If you look at London, London is a very young town, as a matter of fact. It isn't this ancient metropolis that we would like to think it is. But over 400 years, 500 years, look at how it changed from predominantly mud and thatch to suddenly brick and concrete when the Romans arrived, and then how it changed again into a convoluted sewer system, and then how it burnt down and rebuilt itself. There's a story there, and it's got a whole lot of hooks that we can quite happily tie into. Ancient Roman catacombs suddenly come alive with undead. Now our intrepid heroes in the 1920s have to figure out why and where and all those kind of things. So use the story to drive your world building. So now you've populated your map. You've said, right, I want to have orcs over here, I've got this over here, I've got this over here, and I've got these people over here. What's the next question? Why have they not invaded each other and destroyed each other? The story of man is the story of violence. There is no getting away from it. And I think it is going to be our story in perpetuity. We want to be secure. We want to be safe. This means that if there is something strange on our borders, we want to make sure that it cannot hurt us. That's how we sleep at night. It's just who we are. It also seems to perpetuate in the animal kingdom as well. Animals mark out their territory. Enter into my territory, I shall attack and destroy. So it is something for you to look at and say, well, if I've got humans here and I've got elves there, why are they in an alliance? Why do they work together? And you cannot simply say, oh, they all work together because the humans, the elves, and the dwarves are in a beautiful alliance. Go play WoW if that's your answer, because that's a beautiful alliance. And you go, well, okay, why have the elves and the humans decided to cooperate together? Traditional elves live for 1,000 years. Humans live for 100, if that. What could the elves possibly benefit from letting the humans exist? What do the humans bring to the table that the elves can't get for themselves? They have 1,000 years to think of things. They really don't need humans. Unless the humans are a buffer between the elves and the orcs, or the elves and the dwarves. So then the humans are tolerated by the elves, and the dwarves may see the humans as a barrier. But instead of going to war with the humans because it would be costly for the dwarves, they've decided to diplomatically try and lure the humans over to their side. Then they can use the humans as the initial invasion force into the elvish territories, and then they can mop up both the humans and the elves in one swift stroke. These are just questions that you're asking about why. Why there? Why not somewhere else? Why have the humans, who we know reproduce very, very quickly, not taken over the entire galaxy? The moment they discovered spaceflight, they're going in all different directions. You'll have breakaway factions. They'll go off and reproduce and they'll shag everything they can. Why have they not taken over the galaxy? Maybe it's because there are other species that have taken over the galaxy faster than the humans. Maybe it's because there's a species that's injected the humans with a natural racial limit. There can only be 20 billion humans in the universe. Once we get to 20 billion and one, the human race starts to go into a medical decline for whatever reason. Well, there's a whole nother storyline on its own. Just by asking questions, suddenly you've got adventures coming out of your ears, and your world starts to feel very dynamic. It starts to feel as if the players are entering into this ancient space. So, asking these questions, coming back and saying, okay, well, if the humans, the elves, and the dwarves are in an alliance, why are they in an alliance? What allows us to do other things? Why are the orcs not invading? Why have the elves, the humans, and the dwarves not decimated the orcs? What's kept the balance of power? What's kept things floating? Sometimes it's as simple a thing as slavery. If you look at the Western colonization of Africa, there are still native African people in Africa. Why weren't they wiped out by the Europeans when they arrived? Because they needed them. They wanted to make them into servants. Look at England, for example. They were invaded countless times by countless different races, for lack of a better word. The Romans had to go, the Vikings had to go, the French had to go. The Irish didn't. Why not? What kept them from moving across? Could it have been the whales? So, if you want to see more about the world that I've created in a very simple overview, head on over to Bacon RPG on, I think the channel link is below, or we'll put it below. And there's a tour of Braxia, and that will take you through each of the different areas, and you'll see how, as the world rotates, as you rotate around the world, I've tried to include as many different races as I personally wanted to have in my campaign, but I have also tried to create stories around them. And you'll see there's little tidbits that have nothing to do with the players. They won't ever care about certain information that I've put into that map. But what they will care about is that when they arrive at Memnefer, for example, or at one of the other cities, that there's a story there. Once you've worked out, by the way, the alliances, the reasons for invasion, the reasons for not invasion, whatever the case might be, you can then start to put cities around. And again, if your world is designed to feel like it's this isolated, dangerous place, you maybe want one city per 100 or 400 miles. It should feel like journeying from one to another is dangerous, is perilous, because it's so far away. Maybe your galaxy is populated by black holes that randomly pop up and disappear again, as needed by how you are evoking your world setting. Story controls creation. And the reason for it is the greatest story, as they say, starts with creation. And it's written as a story. So take what you've then applied to your continents, take what you've then applied to putting in your cities and your people, and now you bring it down to the macro level. You now bring it down to, I want to create a little space for my players to play in. They're not going to play in the whole world. They're going to play in a little piece of it. But that little piece should be doing exactly what your big piece is doing. You create a little village or a little castle or a little town or a planet that they start on. It needs to have the same kind of thought built into it. Why did they put the town here? What resources does the town have nearby? What potential story drivers are nearby? I'm trying to evoke a rich, opulent world. Great, that means we've got forests full of oak trees, we've got rich rivers full of fish. There's no need for you to then add in a dark swamp, unless that's the encroaching menace. So try and use the values that you've determined in your first and second part of world building to influence the locality. And remember, you're a god. You can add in a swamp. It might not be on the big map. Just add in a swamp in your little map. The players really won't mind. It's just too small for the cartographers to have written down. I hope that's given you some insight into how story can control the world building process and help make it easier. Hit that like button, hit the subscribe button. We've got something really awesome coming up, so keep watching. World building continues next week. I've got a long list of stuff that we're getting through, but keep writing those comments, keep asking your questions. I do try and answer them all. And until next time, happy gaming.